37 armed women on a white beach, and one unarmed man whom they all want to kill. He opens his eyes, and the first thing he sees is a bare female foot 10 centimeters from his face. His brain is still asleep, but his hands are already analyzing. Slight pronation, a callus on the third metatarsal, an old injury that her owner has been hiding from everyone for years. Cade Hart looks up. Greaves, chainmail, a sword, a face as sharp as a hawk's, and that face is looking at him as if he'd crawled out of her nightmare. A second one steps up behind her, a third. Cade counts automatically. 5, 10, 20. 37 blades against one. A bluish window flashes before his eyes. Text in a language he shouldn't understand, but does. Guardian, support class, skill, guardian's touch, transfer of attribute through physical contact, condition, voluntary consent of both parties. Cade reads this twice and smirks. In his past life, people made appointments at his clinic a month in advance. Looks like there'll be a line here too. Only now the patients have weapons. A woman with a hawk-like face takes a step forward. The sword in her hand doesn't tremble. She asks who he is and what the man forgot at the Ascension trial. Her voice is icy, accustomed to giving orders. And right then, Cade notices 3 things. Her left index finger twitches every 3 seconds. Her right shoulder is higher than her left, an old, untreated injury. And she's holding the sword in her left hand, not because she's left-handed. It's because her right hand doesn't work as well as it should. He could tell her that right now, but the 36 blades behind her are already exchanging glances, some with curiosity, some with fury. Cade stands up, slowly. He shows her his empty palms. He replies that he doesn't know how he got here, that he has no weapons, that the system calls him the Guardian and he has no idea what that means. The woman's expression doesn't change. She turns to the others and drops the bombshell that a man has appeared at the trial for the first time in 12 centuries, either a mistake of the gods or a provocation, and that until they figure it out, he will live. She pronounces the word, for now, separately, like a suspended sentence. Cade takes note. The first hour is lost in chaos. 37 women from the 12 kingdoms. Half know each other. Half of that half hate each other. The Northerners huddle together in a pack. 3 fair-haired women in heavy armor look down on the Southerners as if they were dirt. The Southerners return the sentiment. The forest clans huddle apart, small, quick, wary. The city mages stand apart. 2 bear the same family crest but remain silent, stepsisters from different harems. Cade catches all this out of the corner of his eye. They leave him alone. They don't feed him. They ignore him like a piece of driftwood washed up on the beach. And that's fine. While they ignore him, he watches. 10 years in sports medicine have drilled one thing into him. The body doesn't lie. Faces lie, words lie, but the body never does. The Northerner in heavy armor strides powerfully, but her left knee splayed outward with every step. A torn ligament has healed crookedly. In a year, it will become chronic. The archer from the forest clan, young, maybe 15, quick, but her shoulders are hunched up to her ears. Chronic stress. She got up before everyone else, or didn't sleep at all. A red-haired priestess from the west cackles for the whole camp to hear, wide gestures. She's entertaining half the island. But Cade sees how she slumps when she thinks no one is watching. Her back collapses instantly. And something else, not in the body, but behind it. She laughs as if she'll collapse the moment she stops. By evening, campfires flare up. 4 groups, 4 fires, 20 meters between them. No one shares food. Each group posts lookouts, not for monsters, from each other. Cade sits by the 5th fire, alone. The fire is crooked and smoky because in his past life he had a stove and food delivery on his phone. but he sits and counts. 37 women. At least half have chronic injuries they've been dragging around for years. Here, healers treat them with potions and prayers. It's like treating a fracture with painkillers. The pain goes away, but the damage remains. And Cade knows the body not magically, but anatomically. Trigger points, joint mobilization, breathing. Everything that in his world was called 21st century medicine. There's none of that here. Here, they don't understand that knee pain originates in the hip, that panic in battle isn't cowardice but a constricted diaphragm. He could be useful. He knows it. There's just one question. How to explain this to 37 armed women who consider a man's touch a desecration of the blade. The window flickers before him. The keeper's touch. Only with voluntary consent. Force doesn't work. Deception doesn't work. Only trust. In a world where no one trusts anyone, on an island where half are ready to slit each other's throats. He needs a schedule. He needs a board. He needs at least one person who will tell the others not to kill him. Cade lies down on the sand. The stars are foreign, not a single familiar constellation. Somewhere in the jungle, a roar is born, a low, guttural roar that makes his chest vibrate. The monsters here are real. Cade closes his eyes. Tomorrow. It will all start tomorrow, if they don't kill him tonight. The morning of the second day began with a scream. Cade jumped up from the sand. One of the northerners stood at the water's edge and pointed toward the jungle. Something, dark, with 6 legs and a head like a deer's but with 3 rows of teeth. The creature stepped onto the beach, slowly, confidently, like a master. 37 women reacted within 2 seconds. Swords slid from their sheaths. Magicians raised their hands. Archers drew their bows. Cade put. He couldn't do anything. He had no weapon. He had no combat skills. He had knowledge of the structure of the knee joint in the 4-7-8. Against a 6-legged monster with 3 rows of teeth, it was useless. The fight lasted less than a minute. The woman with the hawk-like face, the very one, Zion Che. She moved first. 1 step, 2. On the 3rd step, her sword traced an arc that Cade couldn't follow with his eyes. The creature collapsed. 2 halves, a clean cut. The remaining 36 didn't even get a chance to strike. Cade watched and thought. S-rank. So this is what it looks like. A person who slices a 6-legged monster in one motion. And this person has a nerve pinched at the level of the 6th cervical vertebra. She loses half a second on every lunge. In a fight against an equal, that's her death. Zion wiped her sword on the grass. She turned. She looked at Cade. He didn't look away. She walked toward him. The others watched. 36 pairs of eyes. Silence. Only the waves and the cries of unfamiliar birds. Zion stopped 2 steps away. She said she'd seen how he was looking, not at the fight, at her body. She asked what he saw. His voice was even, no threat, but no warmth either. Just a question from a man accustomed to getting precise answers. Cade could have lied, could have said nothing, could have brushed it off. But he knew one thing that 10 years of working with elite athletes had drilled into his subconscious. They sense a lie. Anyone who has lived their life on the edge of their body can sense when they're being lied to about it. So he told the truth. He asked her to sit with her back to him and show him how she draws her sword from its sheath. 36 women tensed. Some placed their hands on their weapons. A man asking an S-rank swordswoman to turn her back on him. In this world, that's like an insult. Or a trap. Zion didn't move for 10 seconds. Then she sat down, with her back to him. She drew the sword from its sheath, slowly, controlled. She sheathed it again. Cade watched, not the sword, her shoulder blade, her trapezius, how her right shoulder rose half a centimeter higher than necessary as her arm moved, how her left latissimus dorsi was doing the work the right rotator cuff should have been doing. He spoke. 3 years ago, she'd been struck in the right shoulder. The blow passed, but the joint capsule became inflamed. She didn't treat it. Now she has chronic compensation. She pulls the sword with her left latissimus dorsi, and her right shoulder is essentially dead. Her finger twitches because a nerve is pinched at the level of the 6th cervical vertebra. She loses half a second on every lunge. In a real fight against an equal opponent, it would cost her her life. Silence. Absolute. Even the waves seemed to have fallen silent. Zion didn't move. Cade saw her neck tense, saw her fingers clench the hilt. He knew she was deciding right now to kill him for reading her weakness aloud, or to let him continue. She asked with a single word, "Can I?" He replied, "We can try to fix this right now. 4 minutes." She didn't answer, but she didn't stand up, and she didn't turn away. That was consent. Cade raised his hands. 36 women leaned forward. Some drew their weapons halfway. He paid no attention. He was in a mode he'd called a work tunnel in his past life. The world narrowed down to a single body, to a single problem, to a single solution. The spot under his right shoulder blade, with his index and middle fingers. Pressure. 3 seconds. 5. 7. He felt the knot beneath his fingers begin to loosen, slowly, like a rope being unwound over a very long time. Mobilization of the cervical spine. Left hand on the back of the head, right on the chin. A gentle turn, 1 degree. 2. 3. A click. Quiet. Almost inaudible. But Zion exhaled, sharply, like someone who had been holding their breath and hadn't noticed. Thoracic stretch. Hands on her ribs. Opening. Slow. Controlled. The system flashed. Touch accepted. Transferring characteristics. 10%. Cade felt it like a warm wave that flowed from his hands into her back, a strange sensation, as if part of his power had flowed into another person. 4 minutes. Exactly. He released his hands and took a step back. Zion stood up, slowly. She raised her right hand, clenched her fist, unclenched it, clenched it again. Her finger didn't twitch. She drew her sword from its sheath, quickly, with her right hand. A lunge, a return, another lunge. Cade counted, a quarter of a second faster than before, maybe more. Zion turned to face the other 36. Her face was stony, her eyes dry, but her voice was slightly lower than usual. She said that no one was to touch him. No one. Not until she gave permission. And she walked back to her on the beach, without looking back. Cade stood on the sand. His hands still remembered the warmth of her back, the knots under her shoulder blade, the tension in her neck. Years of pain she had carried in silence. He had just acquired his first bodyguard, and his first big problem. Because 36 pairs of eyes were now staring at him, no longer with contempt, with hunger. Each of them carried their own pain. Each had seen that in 4 minutes he had done what potions and prayers had failed to do over the years, and each wanted the same. But Zion said no one, and Zion was S rank. By noon, Cade found a stream 100 meters from the beach. Fresh water, that was the most important thing. He drank greedily. He washed his face. He sat down on a rock and began to think. He needed a plan, not a survival plan. A work plan. 37 patients, chronic trauma, combat stress, a cultural taboo against male touch, warring factions. And he was alone, with 2 hands and a head full of knowledge that didn't exist in this world. He found a flat piece of a fin, long, almost like a board. He found a sharp stone and began to scratch. Schedule. Morning. Diagnosis. Day. Individual work. Evening. Group exercises. Recovery. He knew it looked crazy. A schedule on the beach, among monsters, on an island with no way out except through 12 trials. But that was exactly what he was good at. System, order, structure. The body isn't healed by chaos. The body is healed by routine. He planted the fin vertically in the sand. First line, Zion, 800, shoulder. Second line, blank. He didn't know yet who would be second, but he knew she would appear, because pain doesn't wait for permission. On the third day, an archer came to him. She didn't come. She crept up. Cade was sitting by the stream, sharpening a stone so he could write more evenly on the board. He didn't hear a single step. Suddenly, there was just a person beside him. Small, thin, Korean features, hair pulled back into a tight knot, eyes like a beast accustomed to being hunted. Ari Moon. He'd remembered the name yesterday when the warriors introduced themselves to one another by the campfires. She hadn't introduced herself. One of the northerners had said her name, with contempt, as if she were forest game. Ari sat down on a rock across from him, silently. She stared at him without blinking. Then she said she didn't believe what he'd done to Sion, that it was a trick, that any charlatan could press a couple of points and call it healing, and that if he tried to touch her, she'd shoot his fingers off. Cade didn't argue. He just looked at her, professionally. Shoulders raised to her ears, chronic tension in her upper trapezius, neck clenched, shallow breathing, upper, chest breathing, diaphragm not working. She was unconsciously protecting her stomach with her hands, even while sitting, even when there was no threat. He asked how long she'd had stomach pain. Ari froze, like an animal in the light of a lantern. He continued. He said that judging by her breathing and the way she held her torso, the pain was constant, most likely a burning pain. It intensified on an empty stomach. She slept poorly. She woke up long before dawn, not because she wants to, but because her body wakes her with pain. Ari didn't answer. She stood up, turned around, walked into the jungle, quickly, silently, just as she had come. Cade didn't try to stop her. He knew this type. Had seen it dozens of times at the clinic. Young athletes with chronic stress. The body screams, the mind doesn't listen. Because listening means admitting it hurts. And admitting it hurts means being weak. And being weak in her world means dying. He went back to the board. Second line, Ari Moon, 8:30, ankle and stomach. She didn't show up for her appointment. Cade didn't press the issue, but every morning he got up before dawn, because he'd noticed that Ari was the first to get up, before anyone else, when it was still dark. She would walk to the far end of the beach and sit there alone, staring at the sea. On the fourth morning, Cade walked to the far end of the beach to join her. He built a small fire. He placed a flat stone over the flames. He found some rhizomes growing by the stream. They smelled like ginger, but milder. He poured water over it. He made a decoction. When Ari emerged from the darkness, she saw him, and a cup made from half a coconut filled with hot decoction. She stopped. He said it was for the stomach, ginger root, or something like ginger, to drink on an empty stomach, slowly, in small sips. Ari stood motionless. Then she approached. She took the cup. She burned herself. She hissed. She blew on it. She took a sip. No thank you. No nod. She simply sat down on the sand 3 meters away from him and drank in silence. Cade didn't try to make conversation. He sat and looked at the sea. They sat in silence together until dawn. On the 5th morning, Ari came, and the cup was already sitting on a rock. On the 6th morning, she sat 2 meters away instead of 3. On the 7th, she said her stomach hurt less. Her first words in 4 days. Cade nodded, said that was good, and that if she let him look at her ankle, he could help with that too. Ari said nothing, but on the 8th morning, she held out her leg, silently, without looking at him. She was looking out toward the sea. Cade worked. The ankle, an old sprain, the ligaments had healed with shortening. She'd been compensating for it for years, changing her stance, overloading her knee. If this continues in 2 years, she won't be able to run, and an archer who can't run is a dead archer. He explained this to her, simply, without drama, like a doctor to a patient. Ari listened. Then she asked why he was doing this. He replied that her ankle hurt. She said no. Why does he get up before dawn and brew this root for her? Every day, Cade thought. Then he answered, because breakfast on an empty stomach with a damaged stomach is painful, and he knows how to make it so it doesn't hurt. Ari was silent for a long time. Then she quietly said that he was strange, and she left. But that evening, for the first time, she sat not by the Forest clan's fire, but by Cade's fire, silently, at a distance, but close by. Meanwhile, the camp was changing, slowly, painfully, like a body that's starting to take medicine. Zion Che came for a session every morning, at exactly 8 o'clock. She sat down silently with her back to him. Cade worked on her shoulder. She left. Not a word more than necessary, but she came, every day, and everyone saw it. If an S-rank swordswoman comes to him, then he's no charlatan. By the end of the first week, a line had formed on its own. Not for Cade, for Sion. They asked her, not him. Is it okay? Is it safe? Will he defile their blade? Sion answered the same way every time. He repairs the body. He doesn't touch the blade. Decide for yourselves. The first to come after Sion was Emma Kane, a redhead, freckles, a warrior priestess. She came openly, in the daytime, in front of everyone. She sat down across from Cade and said her lower back had been giving out for 3 years now, and if he was such a miracle worker, let him prove it. Cade asked her to stand up and lean forward. She leaned forward. He saw. The left side of her lower back is locked up. The quadratus lumborum is in spasm. The sacroiliac joint is on the verge of failure. He told her it wasn't her lower back, it was her pelvis. The left side of her pelvis is slightly misaligned, probably from a blow or a fall. The lower back is just compensating. Emma raised her eyebrows. 3 years ago, she fell off a horse onto her left side. She hit a rock. She got up and went back to the fight. It was the day her brother died. She didn't seek treatment then, or later. Cade didn't ask why, he just worked. 15 minutes. The pelvis, the sacrum, the quadratus lumborum, the deep hip rotators. Emma was silent. She wasn't joking anymore. By the 10th minute, she bit her lip, not from pain, from something else. Cade knew what. The body remembers, always, a trauma linked to loss. When touched in that spot, the body recalls not only the fall, but everything that came after. When he finished, Emma stood up, walked around. She stopped, leaned forward, straightened up. Cade saw how her face had changed, not from pain, from the absence of it. She turned to him. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. She said thank you, and walked away quickly, too quickly for someone whose lower back had just been released. By the end of the second week, the schedule on the chalkboard looked like this. Zion, 8, shoulder, Ari, 8:30, ankle, Emma, 9, lower back, and a chat. A northerner named Dagny, 9:30, knee, another southerner, 10, wrist, and so on. 13 entries. 13 women who came to him regularly. The other 24 watched, waited, or didn't believe. Cade worked from 8 in the morning until sunset, every day, no days off, because that's how he worked in his past life, because that's what he was best at, and because every time he laid his hands on someone else's back and felt the knot release, he knew. That's why he was here. Not for the stats, not for the transfer of power, for the fact that the person stops hurting. By the third week, the camp began to resemble something alive. Not a family, not an army, more like an organism that had stopped rejecting a transplanted organ. The women still slept in 4 groups. They still posted lookouts against each other, but now they gathered around a single board made of a fin and looked at the schedule. And this was the first place in the camp where they stood side by side, not for battle. Cade noticed this on the 17th day. In the morning, 5 people from different factions gathered at the board at once. Dagny, a northerner, stood shoulder to shoulder with Mira, a southerner. Both were looking at the board. Both were looking for their names. They weren't talking, but they were standing side by side. 2 weeks ago, that would have been impossible. He added a new line. Group stretching. Evening. For everyone. Optional. 9 people showed up. Then 14. Then 20. He demonstrated simple things. How to stretch the back of the thigh. How to open up the chest. How to breathe with the diaphragm instead of the chest. Warriors who had trained through pain for decades heard for the first time that pain is not a virtue, but a signal. That training until the muscles bleed means destroying what they are building. That the body grows not when it is broken, but when it is allowed to recover. To them, this was heresy. To Keita, it was his first course in sports medicine. He explained patiently, every evening, the same thing in different words, because he knew that habits ingrained over decades don't change in a single session. On the 20th day, what he'd feared from the start happened. One of the Southerners, quiet, unobtrusive, her name was Lyra, a mercenary. She came to his campfire at night. She said she needed a session, right now. Cade looked at her. No visible injuries, steady gait, calm hands. He asked what was wrong. She replied that nothing was, that she wanted a stat transfer, 10%. Just like that, for no reason, because there might be a fight tomorrow and she needed to be stronger. Cade shook his head. He explained. The keeper's touch works through trust, not through the desire to become stronger. He isn't a vending machine. You can't just walk up, drop a coin, and get a bonus. Lyra didn't accept that. She said he distributes power as he sees fit, that it's a form of authority, and that those on his schedule get an advantage over those who aren't. Cade replied, "The schedule is based on medical need. Whoever is in more pain goes first. Not who is stronger, not who is more important. Who is in more pain." Lyra smirked. She said those were pretty words, and she left. But Cade knew she would return, and that she wasn't the only one who thought that way, because she was right. Partially. Those who attended the sessions changed, not just physically. Zion moved faster. Fact. Her lunge became a quarter of a second faster, and everyone noticed it. Emma stopped slouching. Her priestess magic required a straight back and expanded lungs. Now that her lower back didn't hurt, her spells were 20% more powerful. Ari ran more easily. She shot more accurately, because a relaxed neck means a steady gaze, and a steady gaze means an accurate shot. The others saw it. They noticed, and they were angry. On the 22nd day, Bree Vaughn approached Keed, the storm mage, tall, powerful, a voice accustomed to drowning out a storm. She didn't ask for a session. She said it created inequality, that those near him grew stronger, while those who weren't fell behind, that it would split the camp worse than a war between kingdoms. Cade listened. She was right. He knew it. He replied, said he was ready to work with everyone, every day, no exceptions. But he needed more time. 24 hours in a day, 37 people, 1 hour for each. The math doesn't add up. He needs assistance. Bree raised an eyebrow. What kind of assistance? Cade explained. He couldn't be the only one who knew how to work with the body. He was ready to teach. Simple things, stretching, breathing, basic muscle work. If at least 5 people mastered the basics, they could help the rest. He wouldn't lose his monopoly. He'd share it. Bree looked at him for a long time. Then she said he was either an idiot or a genius, and that she'd think about it. She thought about it until evening. Then she came back and said she'd be his first student. She had big hands. She was used to precise movements because storm magic required absolute control of her fingers. Cade began teaching her that very evening how to find trigger points, how to apply pressure, for how many seconds, how to sense when a muscle releases. Bree was a good student, quick, attentive, and she had one unexpected talent. She knew how to talk to people so that they relaxed. The loud voice that drowned out thunder in battle became low and warm at work. By the 25th day, Cade had 3 students, Bree, Emma, and a quiet druidess from the Eastern clan named Nari, who understood the body intuitively, through plants. She knew which roots reduced inflammation, which leaves soothed muscles. Cade showed her where to apply pressure, and she showed him what to apply afterward. Together, they were more effective than he was alone. The schedule had grown, 20 entries, 20 women out of 37. The remaining 17 were waiting, or didn't believe, or were too proud. Lyra was among them. She watched, every day, with a stony face. On the 28th day, the second battle with the monster took place, at night. 3 creatures emerged from the jungle, not as large as the first, but fast, black, many-legged, like spiders the size of a horse. The sentries sounded the alarm. The camp was awake in seconds. The swordswomen charged forward. The mages provided cover. The archers flanked them. The battle lasted 4 minutes. The coordination was better than the first time. Not perfect, but better. The women began to feel each other out. They began to trust at least the back of the person standing next to them. The spiders were killed, but one of the archers took a blow to the arm. Not Ari, another one, from the southern clan. Her arm was hanging wrong, a dislocated shoulder. She clenched her teeth and didn't make a sound. Cade was there in 30 seconds. He examined her. An anterior dislocation. The head of the humerus had shifted forward. In his world, this would be fixed in a minute in the emergency room. Here, he had no emergency room. He looked the archer in the eyes, told her it would hurt but be quick. She nodded. He took her arm, bent it at the elbow, slowly pulled it outward. Rotation, pressure, a click. The head popped back into place. The archer exhaled. Cade checked the range of motion. Normal. He tore off a piece of cloth and made a bandage, a sling for immobilization. He told her not to move her arm for 3 days, then to come back to him. The archer nodded. And for the first time in a month, she looked at him without contempt. He was no warrior. He couldn't kill a spider the size of a horse, but he could set a shoulder in 30 seconds in the dark on the beach after a battle. And for a woman who had just nearly lost her arm, that was more important than any sword. On the morning of the 29th day, 24 people stood by the board made of a fin. 7 new names in a single night. Lyra wasn't among them, but she stood to the side and watched. Cade walked up to the board and added a line at the very bottom. 1 open slot, for those not signed up. Optional. No name, just a time. Because pain doesn't wait for you to decide to trust. The 30th day, a month on the island. Cade sat by the stream and counted. 24 women on the schedule, 3 students. 4 campfires became 3 because 2 groups joined together around a shared food supply. There were 4 monsters this month, all killed, casualties, 0 deaths, 2 dislocations, 1 deep wound, countless scrapes, 3 flare-ups of chronic injuries, all treatable. That was good. But Cade couldn't shake the unease that had lived within him since day 1. 13 women hadn't come to him. 13 out of 37. Not all out of pride, some out of fear. The taboo against a man's touch was alive. It sat in their bones, in their muscles, deeper than any injury he could find with his hands. To them, his touch was a desecration. It didn't matter that the system called him the keeper. It didn't matter that Zion had permitted it. Their bodies tensed at the thought of a man's hands on their skin. And Cade respected that, because the first rule of a physical therapist is, the patient's body belongs to the patient, not the doctor. But that meant the 13 warriors weren't getting rehabilitation, they weren't getting their transfers, and the gap between them and the rest was growing every day. On the 31st day, Yuna's son appeared. Cade didn't notice when she approached. No one noticed when she approached. An assassin. A secret order. She moved like a shadow. She spoke in a whisper. Her face was expressionless, eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. She stood by his campfire and waited. Cade looked up. He looked at her. Yuna didn't sit down. She didn't speak. She just stood there. He could have asked what she wanted, but he didn't. He did what he'd done with Ari. He boiled the root, poured it into half a coconut, set it on a rock next to him, and went back to his notes. Yuna stood there. 3 minutes. 5. Then she sat down. Not next to him, 2 meters away. She took the cup, drank, silently, put it back, stood up, left, didn't say a word. Cade didn't try to stop her. She came back the next evening, and the next, each time in silence, each time for 2 minutes. A cup, silence, departure. On the 5th evening, she didn't leave. She stayed seated, in silence. Cade was working on his notes. He didn't look at her. He didn't pressure her. 10 minutes later, Yuna spoke, in a whisper. She said she had been taught from the age of 6 not to feel touch, that any touch was either an attack or a technique, that she couldn't remember when she had been touched just like that, without a purpose, without pain, without training. She doesn't remember if she had parents who stroked her head. Most likely not. Most likely she was taken away before she could remember. Cade listened. He didn't move. He didn't nod. He didn't make a sympathetic face. He just listened. When she finished, he asked, could he place his hand on the back of her head? For 2 minutes, no more. No technique, no diagnosis, just a hand. Yuna was silent for a long time. He saw a wave pass over her face. Not emotion, something deeper. A body making a decision, to trust or not. She nodded, once, almost imperceptibly. Cade raised his right hand, slowly, so she could see every movement. He placed his palm on the back of her head. Warmth, the weight of his hand, nothing else. Yuna didn't breathe for the first 10 seconds. Then she exhaled, long and deep, like a person surfacing from the depths. 2 minutes, Cade counted in his head. 120 seconds. He removed his hand. Yuna didn't open her eyes for another half-minute. Then she opened them. She looked at him. Her face was still expressionless, but something in her eyes was different. She stood up and left, without a word. But the next evening she came back, and the next. 2 minutes, his hand on the back of her head. Silence. It became a ritual. Cade didn't write Yuna's name on the schedule board. She wouldn't have come if she'd seen her name out in the open. She came in the dark, when no one was watching, and that was fine. Everyone comes to trust in their own way. By the middle of the 2nd month, the camp had changed so much that Cade sometimes didn't recognize it. 3 campfires became 2, then 1.5. 2 groups ate dinner together. The third sat nearby but no longer posted lookouts toward their neighbors. Evening calisthenics drew 25 people. Bree led the right half of the circle, Emma led the left. Nori walked between them and corrected their stances. Cade stood in the center and counted. 2015 out of 37. 12 hadn't shown up. But of those 12, 4 stood to the side and watched. That was progress. Zion came to the session every morning, without fail. Her shoulder no longer hurt. Her finger wasn't twitching, but she came. Cade worked on other areas, the neck, the thoracic region, the lower back. Years of combat had left their mark all over her body. He dressed them one by one, slowly, methodically, like an engineer repairing a bridge section by section. On the 42nd day, Zion fell asleep. Cade was working on her neck, the deep muscles at the back of her head, the suboccipital muscles. They were so tightly knotted that he wondered how she could even turn her head. He was softening those muscles slowly, millimeter by millimeter. And at some point, Zion's breathing changed. It became deep, steady, rhythmic. She fell asleep, right under his hands. Sitting up, Cade froze. Zion Che. The woman who hadn't let anyone touch her for 16 years. The woman who killed her mentor in a duel at 18. Who slept with a sword in her hand. Had fallen asleep under his hands. He didn't move for 20 minutes. Then he gently laid her on her side, covered her with his cloak. The only piece of fabric he had besides his clothes. He stood up. He left. In the morning, when he arrived at the session site, the cloak lay neatly folded. Zion stood with her back to him. She was looking at the sea. She didn't turn around when he approached, but he saw her shoulders. They were trembling, slightly, almost imperceptibly. Cade stopped. He didn't come any closer. He waited. Zion spoke. Her voice was steady, as always. She said she'd dreamed of her mentor, for the first time in 16 years. Not that fight, not the duel. Earlier, when she was 12 and he was teaching her how to hold a sword. He stood behind her and adjusted her grip, and she could feel the warmth of his hands through her gloves. She said she'd forgotten that, made herself forget, because it's impossible to remember the warmth of the hands of a man you've killed. And now she remembered, because yesterday, for the first time in 16 years, a stranger's hands on her neck didn't mean danger. She fell silent. Cade stood there, didn't move. He didn't speak. He gave her time. A minute later, Zion turned around. Her eyes were red, dry. She hadn't cried, but she was close. She said one sentence. "Tomorrow at 8. And she left. Cade picked up the raincoat. The fabric was wet, not from dew. She had cried during the night, alone, covered by his raincoat, for the first time in 16 years. Cade clenched the fabric in his hands. He stood on the beach and watched Zion walk away, her back straight, her stride steady, her shoulder finally level. Not a trace of weakness on the outside, a whole ocean inside. He thought about how this world works. Women who fight monsters with their bare hands don't know how to cry. A man who fixed Olympians doesn't know how to swing a sword. And for some reason, they ended up on the same beach. Maybe that's the test. Not the islands, not the monsters, not the 12 steps, but learning to be there for each other. He returned to the board made of a fin. Zion, 800. Shoulder. He looked at that line and knew that the shoulder hadn't been a shoulder for a long time, but he didn't change a thing. She'll come tomorrow at 8, as always. And he would work, as always, because that's the only thing he knows how to do, and because sometimes that's enough. Yuna's son started coming to see Cade in the evenings and let him touch her. 2 rituals took hold. The morning decoction for Ari, the evening hand on the back of the head for Yuna. Zion fell asleep during a session for the first time in 16 years and cried about her mentor that night. The camp is gradually coming together. 25 out of 37 are participating in the evening training sessions. Cade has 3 students who are helping with his recovery. On the 45th day, Cade woke up because he couldn't breathe. Something cold was pressing against his throat. Not a hand, not a blade, something else. He opened his eyes. Darkness. The moon behind the clouds. The campfire had burned down to embers. A creature was sitting on his chest. Small, the size of a cat. But it wasn't a cat. Translucent, like smoke that had taken shape. Eyes white, without pupils. Fingers thin as spider legs. And those fingers were resting on his throat. Not pressing, just resting, as if testing the fit. Cade didn't move, not because he was brave, because his body refused to obey. Fear shot through him like an electric shock, from the back of his neck to his toes. Every muscle went into spasm. The creature leaned closer. Cade felt the cold from its face. No scent, no breath, just cold, as if a door to winter had been opened right next to him. It looked at him with white eyes, and he understood. This wasn't a monster from the island. It was something else, something that had come for him personally. A sound, quiet, like the wind through a crack, but it wasn't the wind. It was the sound of steel leaving its sheath. The creature flinched, raised its head, and in the next second it was gone. In its place, a cloud of silvery dust hung in the air, and behind Cade stood Zion Che with a sword in her right hand. Not her left, in her right. His shoulder was working. Cade sat down. His hands were shaking. His throat was cold, as if ice had been pressed against it. Zion didn't sheathe her sword. She stood and stared into the darkness, waiting. A minute passed. 2, 5. Nothing. She lowered her sword. She turned to him. She asked if he had seen it. Cade nodded. Zion said it was the Silent One. She knew about them. Stories from the Southern Kingdom. Half human, half ghost. Killers who come in your sleep. They were considered a legend. Now they weren't. Cade asked why it had come to him. Zion looked at him for a long time. Then she answered, because he was the most valuable thing on this island, and the most vulnerable. She didn't explain why she had ended up by his fire in the middle of the night. She didn't say that she had been sitting at the entrance to his makeshift shelter since sunset, silently, with a sword on her lap. Cade didn't ask, but he understood. She knew. She sensed that something was coming, or maybe she just couldn't sleep knowing he was alone. By morning, the whole camp knew. The Silent Ones exist. They're hunting the Guardian, and Zion Che is spending the night by his shelter. Reactions varied. The Northerners suggested posting a guard, 4 shifts of 2 warriors each, around the clock. The Southerners argued, why waste fighters on guarding a single person? He's not a warrior, he doesn't fight. Let him sleep in the center of the camp and that's it. Bree punched the nearest tree. The bark cracked. She said that anyone who didn't understand why he needed to be guarded could try living a month without their hands. Let them walk around with scoliosis and migraines and see how they fight. The argument died down. A guard was posted, 4 shifts, 2 warriors at his hut every night. Ari volunteered for the pre-dawn shift, the very one when she wasn't sleeping anyway. Now, instead of sitting alone at the far end of the beach, she sat by his hut with a bow on her lap. In the morning, he brewed a root for her. She drank. They were silent. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. On the 48th day, the Silent One came again, not alone, 3 of them. They appeared out of nowhere, spilled out of the shadows between the trees like water from an overturned bowl. White eyes, slender fingers, silent. Ari saw it first. The arrow flew into the darkness before a scream caught in her throat. It hit. The creature crumbled into silvery dust. The second darted to the right, a sentry from the Northerners, Dagny, the one with the bad knee. She swung her sword, missed. The creature was fast, too fast. It slipped past the blade like smoke. Dagny swung again, missed. Cade saw it from the tent. He saw Dagnir shift to her left foot and her knee buckle outward, an old injury. She lost her balance on every lunge to the left. The creature saw it too. It came in from the left. Cade shouted. For the first time in a month and a half, he raised his voice. He shouted that it was on the left. Dagnir spun around. He caught the creature in passing, didn't kill it, but knocked it back. And at that moment, Zion arrived. 2 blows, 2 clouds of silvery dust. Silence. Dagny stood, breathing heavily. Her knee was shaking. Cade walked over to her. He crouched down. He looked at her knee. The ligament held, but the joint had become inflamed from the sudden movements. She needed ice. There was no ice. She needed cold water. There was a stream 100 meters away. He asked Ari to fetch some water. She left and returned a minute later with a full helmet. Cade wrapped Dagny's knee in wet rags. He worked on the muscles around the joint. He was relieving the spasm. Dagny was silent, teeth clenched, a stony face. But when he finished and the knee stopped shaking, she looked at him and said one thing, that he'd shouted just in time. That the creature had come in from the left because it knew about the knee. And he knew too. And he'd warned her. Cade nodded. Yes, he knew. Because he'd been working on that knee for 3 weeks. Because he knew every degree it shifted outward, every millimeter of slack in the ligaments. And if he knew that, it meant the enemy could find out too. That thought hit him like a rock. The quiet ones were watching. They saw weaknesses, not just his weaknesses, the weaknesses of his patients, and they exploited them. He called a council that morning for the first time. 28 of the 37 women came. 9 stayed away, but they listened. Cade spoke. The silent ones attack at night. They see weak points, physical ones, injuries, ailing joints, blind spots. Every untreated wound is a door for them. Every pinched nerve is a direction of attack. He said the best defense against the silent ones isn't a guard, not swords, not magic. It's a body with no weak spots. A body that functions as a whole, without compensations, without old injuries that pull it off course. He said he needed all 37 of them, not for the schedule, not for the stat transfer, so that none of them would become a target because of a sore knee or a stiff neck. The silence lasted 20 seconds. Then Lyra stood up, the very same one, the mercenary, who a month ago had said he was a vending machine with bonuses. She walked over to the board, picked up a stone, wrote her name. Lyra, 1100, migraine. Turned to face him. Her face was hard, but something shifted in her eyes. She said she wasn't doing this for him, for herself, so she wouldn't die from a stupid headache when the creature came at them from the left flank. Cade nodded. He said that was the best reason. By evening, there were 32 names on the board. 5 women remained. But Cade wasn't in a hurry. 5 was better than 17. And he now had a new task, not just to heal, to close the vulnerabilities. Every old injury, every clamp, every blind area in the body was a spot the silent ones would strike. He began drawing maps for each woman. He sketched a human figure on a piece of bark. He marked the zones, red, yellow, green. Red meant a problem, yellow meant a risk, green meant normal. 32 silhouettes on pieces of bark, 32 body maps. He hung them inside the hut, and every night before bed he looked at them. He counted the red zones, he thought, he planned. 37 women, 12 islands, 3 years, and invisible enemies who attack through pain. It wasn't a test, it was a war. And his weapons were his 2 hands and knowledge from a world no one here had ever seen. Day 52. Emma returned from scouting the interior of the island. Cade waited at the edge of the jungle, just as he waited every time someone went into the woods. He counted the minutes. He lost count at 18, because Emma emerged from the bushes with an unsteady gait. She was walking, but her left leg was dragging. Her hand was pressed against her thigh. Red fluid was flowing between her fingers. She was smiling, widely, brightly, as always. And she said she was fine. It'll heal, just a scratch. Cade stepped closer. He moved her hand away from the wound. He looked. It wasn't a scratch, a jagged gash along the outside of her thigh. Long, deep. The muscle was visible. And beneath the muscle, Cade could see the pulsing, an artery, not severed, but damaged. The vessel wall was torn. It was holding, for now. One awkward step, one sharp turn, and the artery would burst. You couldn't seal it with a potion. Potions healed tissue, but not vessels. The priestess's magic accelerated regeneration, but didn't patch the artery from the inside. It needs to be stitched up. Now. Cade looked at his hands. For 10 years he'd worked with muscles, with joints, with nerves. But he wasn't a surgeon, never had been. In his past life, he'd refer patients to a surgeon and go drink coffee. Now there was no surgeon, no coffee either. There was him, 2 hands, and a woman bleeding out and smiling because she was used to smiling when it hurt. He led Emma to the stream, laid her on a flat rock, asked Nari to bring some silk. Nari left and returned 10 minutes later with a skein of thin, silvery thread, spider silk, stronger than steel, thinner than a hair. The druid had been gathering it for weeks. For what? She didn't know. Now she knew. Cade took an acupuncture needle from his kit, the only thing from his former life that the system had carried over with him. Thin steel. He boiled it in water over a fire for 3 minutes, threaded the needle. His hands weren't shaking. Not yet. He sat down next to Emma, looked at the wound. He took a deep breath. He exhaled, counting to 7. He told Emma he was going to stitch it up, that it would take time, that it would hurt. She replied that she knew, and that if he stayed silent for 4 hours, she'd definitely zone out from boredom, not from pain. He understood. She was asking him to talk, not because she wanted a conversation, because a voice is an anchor. As long as she hears his voice, she's here. Cade began to stitch. The first stitch. The needle pierced the skin. Emma flinched. She clenched her teeth. He spoke. He told stories. Not about medicine, not about wounds. He talked about her brother. He didn't ask questions. He just talked. He remembered everything she had told him during that first session when she let go of her lower back. His name, his age, how he laughed, how he whistled at the fair, how he once fell off the fence and broke his arm, and cried not from the pain, but because he'd torn his new shirt. Emma listened. Her eyes were wet, but open. The second stitch, the third. Cade worked slowly, precisely, each stitch like a separate prayer. The artery pulsed next to the needle, millimeters. He could see the vessel's wall quivering. One wrong move and that would be it. He kept talking, about the fair, about the smell of roasted nuts, about how Emma's brother once fed a stray dog and the dog followed him for 3 days afterward. Emma laughed, quietly, through her tears, and she didn't stop. 36 women stood in a semicircle, silent. Some were sitting. Ari sat closest of all, bow on her lap, eyes dry, but her lower lip bitten down to the white. Bree stood with her arms crossed. Her face was stony. She counted the stitches. Then she stopped counting. Yuna was invisible, somewhere in the shadows, but Cade knew she was there. He could feel it. Zion stood farthest away, upright, motionless, sword in its sheath, hands at her sides, her face turned toward him. An hour. 2. Cade's hands began to tire, the small muscles of his forearms, the extensors of his fingers. They weren't used to this kind of work. Massage is pressure, stitching is precision, different muscle groups. He kept going. 3 hours. His voice was hoarse. He stopped talking about his brother and started talking about the clinic, about a patient who came in with heel pain and left with a diagnosis of stress-induced jaw tension, and the heel had nothing to do with it. Emma snorted. It hurt, but she snorted. The 4th hour. The final stitches. Cade tied the knot. He cut the thread with his teeth. He leaned back. His hands were shaking. Slight, uncontrollable. His fingers wouldn't obey him. He looked at the suture. Even. Not perfect. The surgeon from his past life would have grimaced. But the vessel was intact. The muscle was closed. The skin was pulled tight. The bleeding had stopped. Emma was lying on the rock, pale, drenched in sweat, but alive. She looked up at him. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with tears. She asked. He had talked to her for 4 hours to keep her from passing out. Cade looked at her. His hands were still shaking. He answered. He had talked to her for 4 hours because she was his friend and he was afraid. Silence. 36 women. Not a sound. Then Ari stood up and walked into the jungle, quickly. Cade knew she was crying. Bree turned away. Nari lowered her head. Yuna was somewhere in the shadows, not moving, but Cade knew. He knew just as he knew the tension of a muscle beneath his fingers. She knew too. Zion was the last to stand. When the others began to disperse, she didn't move. Cade was gathering his tools. His hands were shaking so much that he dropped the needle twice. On the third try, Zion approached, silently. She picked up the needle, placed it in his palm. Their fingers touched for a second. The system flashed. A transfer. Not from him to her, from her to him. 10% of her stats went into his hands. Warmth. The trembling stopped. His muscles relaxed. Cade looked up. Zion was already walking away, back straight, steady stride, as always. But her right hand, the one he'd been repairing for 2 months, it was trembling slightly. She'd given him a part of herself. Not because the system demanded it, because he'd spent 4 hours stitching up her comrade and his hands had failed him, and she couldn't bear it. Cade sat by the stream, a needle in his palm, Zion's warmth in his fingers, and for the first time in 52 days on this island, he felt he wasn't alone. The 60th day, 2 months. Cade stood by the board, made of a fin, and looked at the names. 35 out of 37. 2 remained, both from the same kingdom, both half-sisters from different harems. Names, Reyna and Kayla. They didn't speak to each other, didn't look at each other, lived on opposite sides of the camp, and neither of them came to Cade. Not because of a taboo, not because of pride, because of each other. Cade realized this in the 3rd week. If one signed up, the other would take it as a betrayal, as if accepting help from the same person meant becoming sisters, and they refused to be sisters. He didn't meddle, didn't try to persuade them. He just waited. On the 62nd day, the waiting ended, at night. Not the quiet ones this time. A monster, a big one, a beast, emerged from the jungle, resembling a bear but with armor made of bone plates. 2 meters at the withers, 6 claws on each paw, and it wasn't heading toward the camp. It was heading toward the stream, toward the only source of fresh water. The guard raised the alarm. The women formed a line, Zion in front, Bree behind her with lightning at her fingertips, Ari on the flank. The fight began quickly and went wrong. The bone armor deflected the swords. Bree's lightning bolts skimmed the plates and struck the ground. Ari's arrows lodged in the cracks but didn't penetrate deeply. The beast wasn't fast, but it was invulnerable, and it was vicious. A swipe of its paw sent the 2 swordswomen into the trees. One got up, the other didn't. Cade ran to her, a northerner, young. Her name was Freya. Broken ribs, 2, maybe 3. Her lung wasn't punctured. She was lucky. He laid her on her side. He secured her rib cage with a cloth. He told her not to move. He returned to the front lines. The beast roared. Zion attacked again and again. The sword slid across the bone plates, striking sparks. It was useless. Cade watched, not at the pain, at the beast. Professional habit. He saw a body, any body, even if it was the body of a 2-meter-tall armored bear. The plates on its back were thick, on its sides too, on its belly. The beast didn't show its belly. The neck. The plates on the neck extended all the way to the chin. But Cade saw it. When the beast turned its head to the right, the plates on the left side of the neck parted. For a quarter of a second, a small gap, the size of a palm, between the 2nd and 3rd plates. He saw it because he'd been studying necks his whole life. The cervical spine, the vertebrae, the muscles, the fascia. He knew every degree of rotation. And he saw that when this beast turned to the right, it lost its protection on the left. Cade shouted to Zion. She heard him instantly, turned toward him for half a second. He shouted, "Neck, left side, when turning to the right, between the 2nd and 3rd vertebrae." Zion didn't nod, didn't answer. She just turned back toward the beast, ran in from the right. The beast turned its head after her, to the right. The vertebrae on the left side parted. A quarter of a second. Zion was on the other side, but someone was closer. Kayla, one of the 2 sisters. She stood to the left of the beast with a spear in her hands. She saw, she heard, and she struck. The spear entered the gap between the plates up to the shaft. The beast wheezed. It collapsed to its knees. Zion finished it off with a single blow to the same gap. Silence. The beast lay in the stream. The water around it was turning dark. Kayla stood over it, without a spear. Her hands were shaking. She looked across the battlefield, to the other side. Reyna was standing there, also armed, also ready for battle. Their eyes met. For the first time in 2 months on the island. For the first time in years before that. Kayla looked away. Reyna lowered her gaze. Nothing happened. And yet everything had happened. In the morning, both of them came to the board. Not together. Reyna first. Kayla an hour later. Both signed up. Reyna at 12, back. Kayla at 12:30, shoulder. Cade looked at the two names side by side on the board and thought, 37 out of 37. All of them. Every single one. For the first time in over 2 months, all 37 women were on the same side. Formally, because of the bone bear and the slit in its neck. In reality, because of something bigger. Freya, with broken ribs, was lying in the tent. Cade checked on her every 2 hours. The ribs will heal, the potions will help, but she needs rest. 2 weeks minimum. In a world without x-rays or hospitals, 2 weeks of rest on a tropical island with monsters is a luxury. He assigned Nari to watch over her. The druidess knew herbs, compresses, pain-relieving decoctions. Cade showed her how to check her breathing, how to listen to her chest through the palm of her hand. If the sound was gurgling, it meant fluid. It meant trouble. If the sound was clear, it meant everything was normal. Nari nodded. She memorized it. She was the best of his students, not because she was smart, because she was patient. She could sit next to a patient for 6 hours without getting tired, without getting bored, just being there, like a tree by a stream. Cade envied that. He himself couldn't sit around doing nothing. 10 years at the clinic, schedule, patient, next, break, next. There was no schedule here in the early days. Now there was. But between sessions, he couldn't stop. He walked around the camp. He looked. He noticed. He corrected. That woman is sitting crooked. That one's shoulder has risen again. That one is limping slightly. He couldn't turn his eyes off. He couldn't stop seeing the bodies. On the 65th day, Bree came to him not for a session. She came in the evening, when the camp was quieting down. She brought a coconut shell with something dark and pungent inside, local alcohol, the fermented juice of some fruit. Cade refused. He didn't drink in his past life. Or rather, he didn't drink when he was working, and he was always working. Bree sat down next to him. She drank alone, silently, for a long time. Then she spoke. Not about the shoulder, not about magic. About what happened when she was 25. A magical surge. She lost control of her storm magic. The lightning struck inward instead of outward. 3 days in a coma. The healers pulled her through. But she fell silent. She finished her drink, poured another. Cade waited. Bree said that after that, she couldn't have children. That the healers said the lightning had burned something inside, something that couldn't be fixed. That her fiancé found out 6 months later. That he left a week after that. That in her kingdom, a woman without children is defective merchandise. She uttered that word, defective, without emotion, like a fact, like the name of a disease. Cade listened. Then he asked, did she want children herself, or did she want to be loved? Bree froze. The shell stopped at her lips. She didn't drink. She didn't speak. She sat there. 30 seconds, a minute, 2. Then she set the shell down on the sand, slowly. She looked at him. Her eyes were shining. Not from alcohol, she said. Thank you. No one had ever asked. She stood up. She walked away, not staggering, straight, strong, shoulders back. But Cade watched her walk, each step a little heavier than the last, as if she were shedding something as she went, something heavy, something she'd been carrying for 6 years. He stayed by the fire, stared into the flames, thought. 37 women, each with her own armor, her own lock, her own way of not feeling. And he's here with 2 hands and 1 question. Not what hurts, but why won't you let it heal? The 70th day. Cade stood at the edge of the camp and looked out at the sea. The horizon was empty. No ships, no islands, no clouds. Just water and sky and the thin line between them. He had stood there every morning for the past week, 5 minutes before the schedule began. Not meditation, not a ritual, just 5 minutes when he thought of no one's body but his own. His body was getting tired, he could feel it. His hands, his forearms, the small muscles that had been working all day, every day for 2.5 months without a break. In his past life, he had days off, 2 days a week, sometimes 3. Here, there were no days off.
Here, every day someone was sick. Someone was in need. Someone came to the whiteboard with a new problem. He couldn't say no. He didn't know how. He never had. At the clinic, he worked 12-hour shifts. His colleagues said he'd burn himself out. He laughed. Then he died in a marathon at 30. The irony remained. On the 71st day, Ari told him he looked terrible. She came for the morning brew, earlier than usual. He was sitting by the fire and couldn't open his right hand. His fingers were cramped. Flexor spasm, overexertion, too many hours of fine motor work. Ari looked at his hand. Then she looked him in the face. She said he heals everyone but himself, that it's stupid, that she's not a doctor, but even she can see his hands are failing him, and that if he breaks down, they'll all die. Cade wanted to brush it off. He didn't get the chance. Ari took his right hand, with both her palms, small, rough from the bowstring, and began to massage it, clumsily, roughly, too hard. She pressed on his knuckles when she should have been on his forearm. She pulled on his fingers when she should have been relaxing his wrist. All wrong, but warm, alive, real.
Cade didn't pull his hand away. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 71 days, someone was touching him, not because the system had asked, not because a transfer was needed, simply because his hand hurt and someone had noticed. The system flashed. A transfer. From Ari to him. 12%. Not 10. 12. The percentage had gone up. Trust. It was growing, slowly, drop by drop. But it was growing. Ari finished. She stood up. She looked down at him, serious, stern, 19 years old, like a little general. She said that from now on he would come to her every morning and offer his hands. She would stretch them out. She didn't know how to do it like he did, but she would learn, because if his hands broke, it would all be over. And she wasn't going to die on this island just because some idiot didn't know how to take care of himself. Cade looked at her. The girl her own clan had sold, who didn't trust anyone because her family had betrayed her. She stood before him and demanded that he let her take care of him. He nodded, said okay, and that he'd show her how to properly massage his forearms. Ari snorted, said that even that he couldn't help but be a teacher.
She left. Cade smiled, for the first time in a week. Something else happened that same day. Cade was working with Mira, a woman from the south, her shoulder girdle, chronic tension from a heavy shield. He stood behind her, hands on her trapezius muscles. Pressure, release. Pressure, release. Mira relaxed. Her breathing was even. And at that moment, Cade felt something. Not in Mira, in himself. Like a thread, thin, invisible, stretching from his palms out into space. He froze. The thread led to the left, across the camp, to the far edge of the beach, to where no one was. He finished the session with Mira. She left. He stood there and felt the thread. It hadn't disappeared. It was pulling, gently, insistently. Cade walked, across the camp, past the campfires, past the schedule board, to the far end of the beach. There was no one there. Sand, waves,
rocks, and the feeling that someone was standing nearby, right next to him, within arm's reach, but his eyes saw no one. Cade stopped. He stood on the empty beach and felt a presence, warm, light, feminine, like the scent of flowers that aren't there, like the sound of a voice you can't hear, but you can feel it.
He said aloud, "I know you're here." Silence. Waves. Wind. Nothing else. But the thread trembled, as if someone on the other end had flinched. Cade stood there for another minute. Then he turned and walked back to camp. He didn't tell anyone, not because he was afraid they'd think he was crazy, because he knew. Intuition. That same feeling that for 10 years had told him where a patient was hurting before the patient even opened their mouth. This isn't an enemy. This isn't the silent one. It's something else. Someone else. The 13th. On the 75th day, the camp gathered for a communal dinner for the first time. One campfire, a big one, 37 women and 1 man. Not everyone sat together, not everyone talked, but everyone ate together. Grilled fish, roots, fruit, a broth that Cade had taught them to make for their stomachs. Bree was cooking, shouting orders at her 2 assistants. Emma was telling a story, waving her arms. Her thigh had healed. The stitch Cade had sewn with spider silk left a thin white mark. She called it a medal. Zion sat in silence, eating, staring at the fire. Ari sat next to Cade, not right up against him, an arm's length away, but close. Yuna was somewhere in the darkness beyond the circle of light, but she was there. Kayla and Raina sat on opposite sides of the fire. They didn't speak, but they ate from the same pot. For them, it was a feat. Cade looked at these people and counted. Not the injuries, not the clamps, not the red zones on the body maps. He counted the faces. 37 faces in the light of a single fire. 2.5 months ago, they were ready to kill each other. Now they were sharing dinner. Not a family, not an army. Something in between. Something for which there was no word in his language. Maybe there isn't one in this world's language either. Maybe Lyra is right. Maybe we need to invent a new one. He ate fish and thought about the thread, about the presence on the empty beach, about the 13th. Whoever she was, she had been here from day one, watching, waiting, and today for the first time she flinched when he spoke. Maybe she wants to sit by the fire too. Maybe there's no slot in the schedule for her either. Cade smiled into the darkness. He made a mental note. 37 plus 1. The schedule needs to be expanded. The 80th day, a little over 3 months on the island, Cade woke up to the silence. Not from a scream, not from a monster's roar. From the silence. There is never silence on the island. Always waves, always birds, always the rustling of the jungle. Now, nothing. He opened his eyes. Gray light, early morning, fog, thick, unnaturally thick. A white wall 3 meters away, nothing visible beyond it. He stood up, stepped out of the hut. The guards were at their posts, Ari with a bow, Dagny with a sword, both tense, both staring into the fog. Ari turned to him. She whispered that the fog had rolled in an hour ago, that something was moving in it, something big. She couldn't shoot because she couldn't see the target. Cade listened, not to the sounds outside, to his own feelings inside. A thread, that very one. It tightened, like a string. Something was pulling him forward, toward the beach, toward the water. He started walking. Ari grabbed his arm. She said he was crazy, that there was something out there. He replied that he knew, but he had to go. She didn't let go. He looked into her eyes, told her he trusted her, and asked her to trust him in return. Ari held his hand for 3 more seconds. Then she let go, but she followed him,
with her bow at the ready. They stepped out onto the beach. The fog stood like a wall. The sand beneath their feet was wet, not from the waves, from the dew that was falling from all sides at once. Cade walked toward the water. The thread pulled, stronger with every step. He reached the edge of the surf. There were no waves. The sea was as smooth as glass. That wasn't right. The sea is never smooth. Something began to take shape in the fog before him. Not a monster, not a creature. Light, soft, golden, like the morning sun behind the clouds. But the sun was behind him. The light was coming from the sea. A system window flashed, a large one, bright, text. Cade read, "The trial of the first island. Final stage. The Guardian has awakened the connections. 37 threads are active. The portal will open after the last Guardian is defeated." The last Guardian. Cade reread it. The last, meaning the strongest. He turned around. Ari was standing behind him. Behind Ari, the others emerged from the mist, one after another. Zion first, sword in hand, face calm. Bree behind her, hands ablaze. Emma, Yuna, Nari, Dagny. All of them. 37. They hadn't come because he'd called them. He hadn't called. They'd come because they'd felt the same thing he had. Threads. 37 threads between him and each of them. They all sensed him and each other for the first time. The sea exploded. A column of water rose 30 meters. A head emerged from it. Serpentine, the size of a house, eyes yellow, each eye the size of a man, scales dark blue, wet, shiny. A sea serpent, gigantic. Its body disappeared into the water, and there was no end in sight. It opened its mouth, and the sound that came out was not a roar. It was a pressure wave. Sand flew up. The trees at the edge of the beach bent. 3 women fell to their knees from the impact. Cade stood his ground, not because he was strong, because Ari stood in front of him and took the shockwave upon herself. Small, 19 years old, her feet ankle-deep in the sand, but she stood her ground. The fight began. Zion attacked first, a leap, impossible for a human. The sword traced an arc, the scales burst, blood gushed out. The serpent recoiled, but the wound closed in seconds. Regeneration. Bree struck with lightning, a direct hit to the head. The serpent twitched, hissed, but didn't fall. Its hide conducted the electricity. Like a bear's bone armor, only worse. Ari fired, arrow after arrow, in the eyes, in the mouth, in the gaps between the scales. The arrows went in, and the snake pulled them out with its tongue like splinters. Cade stood in the center and counted, not seconds, people. Who was where, who was wounded, who was tired, who was on the edge. 5 minutes into the fight, Dagny was limping, her knee, an old problem. Under strain, it gave out. Cade ran up to her. 15 seconds, hands on the knee, pressure on the point below the kneecap, relieve the quadriceps spasm. The system flashed. Transmission. 15%. Dagny stood up. The knee held. She returned to the fight. Cade ran on. A swordswoman from the Eastern clan. She'd been struck by a tail, bruised ribs, no fracture, but it hurt to breathe. Cade worked on her diaphragm. 10 seconds. He released the spasm. Her breathing evened out. Transmission. 12%. She stood up. She returned. The serpent lashed out with its tail. It knocked down trees. It hurled sand like a wall. The water rose with every blow. The beach was flooding. The warriors fought knee-deep in water. Cade ran between them. Just like at the clinic. Just like the day he had 30 patients and 2 hours. Only here the patients were covered in blood, and the patients were fighting a sea monster. Emma took a blow. She flew back, fell onto the wet sand, on her back. Cade was there in 4 seconds. Turned her onto her side, examined her. A bruise, no fracture, a spasm in her long back muscles. She couldn't breathe. He worked quickly, pressure points, paravertebral points, right, left, center. The spasm released. Emma took a breath, loudly, greedily. She looked at him. He told her to breathe in for a count of 4. She nodded, got up, went back into the fight, limping, but she went. Bree was preparing something big. Cade could see the air around her changing, electricity. Her hair stood on end, sparks ran along her fingers. She was gathering all her energy into a single strike, but her hands were shaking. Cade ran up, stood behind her, hands on her shoulders. He wasn't relieving the spasm. He wasn't working with her muscles. He was just standing there, holding her, giving her support. Power transfer. 25%, maximum. Bree exhaled. Her hands stopped shaking. She raised both hands to the sky. Lightning struck from above. Not from her hands, from the sky. She summoned a storm, a real storm. The clouds swirled. Lightning pierced the snake from head to tail. It roared, for the first time in pain. But it didn't fall. Its hide was smoking. Its scales were charred. But it moved. Zion stood knee-deep in water, wet, bloodied. Not her own blood, the snake's. She looked at the monster, and Cade could see her calculating. Where to strike, where, when. He shouted to her, breathe in for a count of 4. She heard him, closed her eyes for a second. Inhale for 4, hold, exhale. She opened her eyes and moved. Cade saw it in slow motion, or so it seemed. Zion was running across the water. Not across the water, across the snake's body, across its tail, across its back, across its neck. Sword in her right hand, her right shoulder was working. Perfect. No compensation, no clenching, no half-second delay like there had been 2 months ago. She ran up to its head. She jumped. The sword entered the snake's skull from top to bottom, up to the hilt. The snake froze. Its eyes went dark. It began to fall, slowly, like a mountain. Zion jumped off, landed in the water, stood up. Water up to her waist. The snake crashed down behind her. A wave washed over the beach. When the water receded, Cade stood chest deep in water. The sand shifted beneath his feet. People around him were coughing, getting to their feet, spitting. He counted, automatically, as always. 1, 5, 10, 20, 30, 35, 36, 37. All of them, all 37 on their feet, wounded, battered, wet, but alive. Not a single one had died. Not a single one. Above the beach where the dead snake lay, the air began to glow. Golden light, that very same light from the sea. It rose upward, expanded, took shape. A portal, huge, round. Something else inside, another shore, another island, a second one. 37 women stood on the beach and looked at the portal, wet, bloodied, alive. Cade walked toward the portal. He stood before it, turned to face them, and began to call out names. Zion. She stepped forward. He touched her forehead with his palm, a light touch, a blessing. She looked him in the eyes, said nothing, stepped into the portal. Ari. She stepped forward, small, wet. The bowstring left a red mark on her fingers. He touched her forehead. She flinched. Habit. Then she relaxed and stepped through. Emma. Limping, smiling, as always. He touched her forehead. She winked, stepped through. Yuna. Silent. He touched her forehead. She closed her eyes for a second, longer than the others, stepped through. Bree. Tall, powerful. His hands were still tingling. He touched her forehead. She said he was an idiot and a genius. She took a step. One by one. 37 names, 37 touches. Each one passed by him and stepped into the golden light. Kayla was the second to last. She stopped, turned around, looked at Raina, who was standing last in line. Their eyes met. Kayla held out her hand. Raina stared at that hand for 5 seconds. Then she took it, They stepped into the portal together. The last one was Lyra, the mercenary, the one who, a month ago, had written her name on the board as the first of those who hadn't come. She stopped in front of Cade, looked at him, for a long time. She said she didn't know what it was like in his homeland, but in her language, there was no word for what he was doing, and that she would invent a new one, and call it by his name. And she walked into the portal. Cade was left alone, on an empty beach. A dead snake behind him, the portal in front of him, wet sand beneath his feet. He looked down. Footprints. 37 pairs of footprints. The water was already washing them away. In an hour, they would be gone. But he saw them now, every single one. He counted them, like patience, as always. 37. Everyone made it. Everyone is alive. He smiled, wearily. The thread twitched. That very one, the 13th, she was here, on the empty beach, nearby. He said quietly, "Let's go." Silence, but the thread grew warm. Cade stepped into the portal. Golden light embraced him, warmth like hands that hold. And he walked forward, toward the second island, toward the next 12 months, toward the 37 women who were waiting for him on the other side. The second island greeted them with rain, not a tropical downpour, light, cold, endless. It rained for a day, 2 days, 3. It didn't stop. There was no sand. The shore was rocky, gray. The trees were different, not palm trees, crooked, gnarled, with bark like an old man's skin. The air smelled of moss and something metallic. Cade stood on the shore and felt himself getting soaked through. Clothes, his hair, his skin, his bones. The cold seeped inside and wouldn't leave. 37 women were setting up camp. Faster than on the first island, more coordinated. Bree was in charge of setting up the shelters. Zion organized the perimeter. Ari went on a reconnaissance mission with 3 archers. Emma built a fire under a canopy of leaves. They had learned. Over 3 months on the first island, they had become something like a machine. Not perfect, creaky, but working. Cade unfolded his board, a new one, made of local tree bark. He transferred the schedule from memory. 37 names, 37 slots. He held the first session an hour after arriving. Freya. Her ribs had healed, but her chest was tight. Her breathing was shallow. 3 months of compensation. He worked on her intercostal muscles, slowly. Rain pounded against the canopy. Freya breathed beneath his hands, and with each breath it grew deeper. Transfer rate, 17%. Trust was growing, among everyone. The average transfer rate across the camp had risen from 10 to 16% on the first island. Zion's was 22, Ari's was 19, Emma's was 20, Yuna's was 24. Cade noticed this with surprise. Yuna, who didn't speak or show emotion, trusted him more than Emma, who hugged him at every meeting. The body doesn't lie. Words lie. Hugs can lie. But the transmission percentage through the system is pure mathematics of trust. On the 5th day of the second island, Ari brought news. Deep within the island, there are ruins. Stone, old, very old, and something is glowing in the ruins. Cade went with the reconnaissance group. Zion insisted on accompanying them. 8 women, he in the center, as always. The ruins turned out to be a temple, or what was left of it. Walls of dark stone, carvings on the columns, figures of women with weapons, familiar poses, warrior women, past participants in the trial. Inside on the wall was a fresco, a large one, faded but still legible. 37 women on the beach, monsters, battles, and among them, Cade stopped. Among the figures in the fresco was a man, one, unarmed, hands raised, not in prayer, at work. He was touching the woman before him, and a glow emanated from his hands. Beneath the fresco, text, an ancient language. The system translated. The first keeper, Ian Rell, a blacksmith from beyond the border who gave everything to one who lost everyone. Cade read, slowly, word by word. Ian Rell, 100 years ago. Another man from another world, just like him, with the same skill, with the same mission. He fell in love with one of the 37, gave her 100% of his power, all his stats, everything he had. She became the strongest warrior in the history of Aelion. The remaining 36 were left without a multiplier. On the 7th island, they began to die, one after another. Ian couldn't help. His power belonged to one. He watched as they perished. On the 12th island, 2 remained, him and her. The final guardian killed her. Ian held her in his arms. Then he died. Not from his wounds, from the fact that he couldn't live without her. The trial was failed. All 12 kingdoms received the curse of the century. Famine, plague, a demonic wave that swept away 3 of the 12. Cade stood before the fresco and didn't move. Behind him, Zion read the same text, silently. Ari, too. All 8 of them. The silence lasted a minute. Cade turned around. He looked at Zion. She was looking at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes spoke. She was thinking the same thing he was, that he could repeat it. That the threads he felt, 37 threads, they weren't all the same. Some were thicker, warmer, closer. He knew which ones, and she knew. Cade spoke aloud, to all 8 of them. He said he wouldn't choose, not a single one, ever. That his hands belonged to all 37 equally, that the schedule was the law, that medical necessity was more important than feelings, and that if anyone thought they could have him all to themselves, that person was mistaken. Silence. Ari turned away, quickly. Zion didn't move. Emma lowered her eyes. Yuna was invisible in the shadows, but Cade felt the thread. It tightened. It hurt. He knew he had caused pain to everyone, to every one of those who felt something more than gratitude. But he had seen the fresco. He saw Ian Rell. He saw what happens when you choose one. And he decided, better to cause a little pain now than a great death later. They returned to camp. No one discussed the fresco, but everyone knew, and everyone remembered. The schedule is the law. Cade doesn't choose. Cade works. The 4th month, the 2nd island. The rain didn't stop. Cade learned to work in the damp. His hands were constantly wet. His skin softened. His fingers lost sensation. He began using the oil that Nari extracted from local nuts. Thick, warm. It smelled like pine needles. It protected his skin and restored his sense of touch. The first monster of the 2nd island appeared on the 10th day. Not from the jungle, from the ground. A creature without skin. Muscles exposed. Red, wet. 4 arms. Each ended in claws as long as a forearm. It was fast. Faster than the spiders from the 1st island. Faster than anything Cade had ever seen. Zion reacted first. A strike. The creature dodged. A 2nd strike. Missed again. It moved in jerks, unpredictable. Bree struck with lightning. A hit. The creature twitched, but didn't fall. Its skinless muscles conducted electricity but didn't burn. They contracted. The creature sped up. The lightning had driven it on. Bree cursed. Ari fired. 3 arrows. 2 hit. The creature ripped them out and lunged forward, toward the center of the camp, toward Cade. The Quiet Ones had told him, or others had told the Quiet Ones. The monsters of the 2nd island know where the keeper is, and they're coming for him. Yuna appeared out of nowhere, between the creature and Cade. 2 knives, short, black. She didn't fence. She struck once, precisely, at the base of the skull, the only place where the muscles attached to the bone. The creature collapsed, twitched, fell silent. Yuna stood over it, knives in her hands, her face expressionless. She turned to Cade, said nothing. She wiped the blades on the moss, put them away, left. Cade stood and thought. The monsters were coming for him, purposefully. That changed everything. On the first island, he had been at the center, and that had been safe. Now the center was a target. He called a council, explained. Zion nodded. She said they would change their formation. Cade would keep moving, not stand still. Constant movement around the camp. There would always be 2 people with him, at least. In battle, he wouldn't stop. He runs, he works, but he doesn't stand still. A stationary target is a dead target. Cade agreed, and added something. He asked Yoon to teach him how to move, not to fight, to move, to dodge, to fall, rolling, getting up, quickly, without a weapon, just not being where the blow will land. Yuna looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. She began teaching him that very evening, quietly, away from the camp, with no spectators. Because Cade moved terribly. He was a physical therapist, not an athlete. He knew how the body worked, but his own body was ordinary, not trained for combat. Yuna was a patient teacher, a quiet one. She demonstrated the movement, he repeated it. She corrected him, not with words, with her hands. She moved his body into the correct position, and every time she touched him, the system flashed. Transmission, from her to him, from him to her, both ways at once. 26%, rising every evening. 27, 28. By the end of the second week of training, 30. Cade could feel it. It was different with Yoon than with the others. Not stronger, not weaker. Different. Like a different frequency, a different rhythm. She didn't talk, she didn't joke, she didn't cry, she didn't share stories. She was just there, every evening, in silence. And that silence spoke louder than any words. On the 20th day of the second island, mercenaries arrived. Not monsters, people. A ship appeared on the horizon in the morning, a large one, bearing the coat of arms of the southern kingdom. Lyra was the first to see it. She turned pale. Cade saw the blood drain from her face. She knew that coat of arms. She knew these people. The ship dropped anchor. Boats were lowered from it. 20 men, all in armor, all armed. The commander, a tall man with silver hair, a diplomat's smile, the eyes of a killer. He stepped ashore and announced that he had arrived on a rescue mission, that the Council of the Southern Kingdom had learned of a violation of the trial's rules, of a man among the warrior women, that they were here to take the Guardian and bring him to the mainland for examination, for safety, for the good of all 12 kingdoms. Cade stood in the center of the camp. 37 women surrounded him. He saw their bodies tense, every single one, all 37, identically. He felt the threads, all 37 tightened, as one. Zion stepped forward, sword in its sheath, hands at her sides, her voice steady. She said that the Keeper was part of the trial, that the gods had inserted him into the system, that taking him meant defying the will of the gods, and that she advised the commander to return to the ship. The commander smiled. He said he had orders from the council, that he wouldn't leave without the Keeper, and that his 20 men weren't a reconnaissance unit, but a combat squad. Cade saw Lyra clench her fists. She knew. This wasn't a rescue, it was a kidnapping. The Southern Kingdom wanted the Keeper for itself, to use his power for one army, to take it away from the other 11. Lyra turned to Cade. Her face was hard. She said these were her former employers, that she knew how they operated, and that if he gave the order, she would kill the commander right then and there. Cade shook his head. No. He walked up to the commander. 20 mercenaries put their hands on their weapons. 37 women behind Cade did the same. He stood between the two armies, unarmed, unarmored. He looked the commander in the eye and said one thing. He said he needed to examine his men, that he could see at least 3 with serious injuries, that the man on the right was limping on his left leg, that the man behind the commander was breathing too rapidly, ribs or a lung, that the commander himself was tilting his head to the right, cervical spine, pinched nerve, morning migraines. The commander stopped smiling. Cade continued. He said that on this island, the monsters were coming for him, personally. Every battle is a fight for his life. If the mercenaries take him aboard the ship, the monsters will follow the ship, and 20 men with sore knees and stiff necks won't last a day. Silence. Rain pounded against the armor. The commander looked at Cade. He thought. Then he said he had orders, and that orders are orders. They came at night, not across the beach, through the jungle, quietly, professionally. 20 men. The guard didn't have time to sound the alarm. Cade woke up because they were dragging him, a bag over his head, his hands tied. They carried him through the forest, quickly, silently, to the shore, to the boats. The threads were screaming, all 37 of them. He could feel every one. Panic, rage, fear. 37 women woke up at the same time, as if someone had pulled a common plug out of the socket. And they came. Chapter summary. On the second island, monsters are deliberately hunting for Cade. Yu-Na saved him and began teaching him how to dodge. Their success rate reached 30%. Mercenaries from the Southern Kingdom arrived under the guise of a rescue mission. Cade tried to resolve the matter through dialogue, but he was kidnapped that night. 37 women sensed it simultaneously through the threads. 12 hours. That's how long the counter-operation lasted. Cade spent them with a bag over his head in the ship's hold. His hands were tied behind his back, the rope cut into his wrists. He counted the minutes, then he gave up. He started counting his heartbeats, a habit from a past life. When a patient is on the table and you're waiting for a reaction to the procedure, you count the pulse, your own, his. 84 beats per minute, tachycardia, fear, a normal reaction to the sack and the ropes and the rocking and the smell of the hold. He was breathing. 4 counts in, 7 hold, 8 out. Again and again. His pulse dropped to 70, then to 68. His body obeyed, even bound, even in the dark. He could feel the ropes, all 37 of them. They were moving, fast, in one direction, toward him. It had started up there 3 hours before dawn. Sounds, shouts, steel on steel, blows, a crash. The ship lurched so hard that Cade slid 2 meters across the hold floor. Lightning. He felt it through the deck. Brie. The air vibrated. It smelled of ozone. Through the wooden planks, another blow. The ship groaned. Something cracked above. The battle lasted 40 minutes. Then the hold door flew inward. Light. After hours in the dark, even a dim lantern hurt his eyes. Cade squinted. Hands on his wrists. Small. Quick. A knife cut the rope. The bag was pulled from his head. Ari. Her face covered in blood. Not her own. Her eyes were wild. She didn't say a word. She grabbed his arm and dragged him upstairs. The deck was chaos. The mercenaries were lying there, all 20 of them. Not dead. Cade could see that. Alive, bound, some unconscious, some moaning. Zion stood over the commander, a sword at his throat, her face stony. The commander lay on his back. His silver hair was wet with blood from a gash in his forehead. He wasn't smiling. Cade looked around. 37 women on the ship's deck, all of them, wet with rain and blood. Some were wounded. Dagna was pressing her hand to her side, a cut, not deep. One of the Southerners was limping, a sprain. Emma sat on a barrel, clutching her head. A blow, a concussion. But all were alive, all 37. Cade looked at Zion. She looked at him. The sword at the commander's throat did not waver. She was waiting for his words.
His decision. Cade approached the commander, crouched down, looked him in the eyes. The commander looked up at him. Fear, for the first time. Not from the sword at his throat,
from the 37 women who, in 12 hours, had organized an assault on the ship and taken down 20 professional mercenaries without a single casualty. Cade spoke. He said he would now examine his men, treat their wounds, bandage them. Then they would board the lifeboats and sail away on their own ship. And if they returned... He didn't finish. Zion finished for him. She said that if they returned, she wouldn't knit. The commander nodded. Cade worked for 3 hours. 20 mercenaries, bruises, cuts, 2 fractures, 1 concussion, 3 dislocations. He treated his enemies, the ones who had kidnapped him, the ones who had tied his hands and shoved him into the hold. He treated them in silence, professionally, because they were in pain, and that was reason enough. Some of the 37 watched this with incomprehension. Lyra stood nearby and said nothing. Then she said quietly that he was crazy. Cade replied that perhaps he was. But if he started dividing people into those he should help and those he shouldn't, he would cease to be who he is. And then the stat transfer would stop working. Because the system senses not intention, but essence. And his essence is to heal. Everyone. The mercenaries had sailed away. The ship was disappearing into the rain, gray on gray. Cade stood on the shore. His wrists stung from the ropes. His head was buzzing, but he stood and watched. Behind him, 37 women, silent. For the first time, they stood not as groups, not as factions, not as northerners and southerners and forest folk and city folk. They stood as one. Cade turned around, looked at them, wet, tired, bloodied. He said he needed to examine each one, now. All the wounds, all the bruises, everything. Zion replied, later. First he would sit down, eat, drink some water, because he was the only one who hadn't eaten in 12 hours and looked worse than those he had just treated. Cade wanted to object. Ari thrust a coconut shell filled with broth into his hands, the very same, ginger, that he had been brewing for her. She had been brewing it for him, while he was in the hold, every hour. So it would be hot when they brought him back. Cade took the shell. His hands were shaking, not from the cold. He took a sip. Hot, bitter, just right. Ari stood nearby, small, serious, wet. She said quietly that he was the only person who had fed her without wanting anything in return, and that now she understood what that felt like. Cade finished the brew, set the shell on a rock, looked at the 37 faces before him. The rain was pouring. It wouldn't stop. But it was warm, because 37 threads were humming inside him. Warm, alive. Every single one. They brought him back, in 12 hours, without losing a single one. 37 women who, 3 months ago, were ready to slit each other's throats. They became a team. Not because he made them, not because the system demanded it, because they took him away. And when they took him away, they realized what they had lost. Not a force multiplier, not a stat transfer, not a schedule or a pair of hands. A person who brewed a potion until dawn, who didn't sleep for 6 hours because someone had fallen asleep on his shoulder, who stitched for 4 hours and talked about the fair so they wouldn't be afraid. They brought back a human being, and in that moment, they became a team. 37 women organized an assault on the ship in 12 hours and brought Cade back. All the mercenaries were defeated without any losses among the warriors. Cade treated the mercenaries after the battle. Ari brewed him the potion he had brewed for her. The kidnapping became a turning point. For the first time, the group realized they were a team, not through a common goal, but through a common loss. A year has passed. 4 islands behind them. 0 deaths. Historically unprecedented. By the 4th island, usually 60% of the group remains. They have 100. 37 out of 37. Plus 1. Hannah Lee, a druid. They found her on the 3rd island, alone, barefoot, thin, sitting in a clearing in the middle of the jungle, talking to a tree. Not metaphorically, literally. The tree answered. The leaves moved without wind. The roots lifted slightly when she spoke. Ari found her first, brought her to Keed. He looked at Hannah and saw. 10 years of solitude, a body that had forgotten how to be around people, muscles accustomed to constant readiness, a back that knew no rest, feet battered by rocks and roots. She had walked barefoot for 10 years. Hannah was not part of the original 37. The system did not recognize her as a participant, but when Cade touched her hand to examine her wrist, the system flickered. A new connection. 38. A thread, warm, thin, different. Hannah looked at him, quiet eyes, deep, like a forest lake. She didn't ask who he was, didn't ask why he was here. She said the trees had spoken of him, that a man with warm hands had appeared on the island, that they heard him working, through the roots, through the earth. When he lays his hands on someone's shoulders, the earth feels it. Cade didn't know how to respond. Hannah entered the camp quietly, like fog rolling in, unnoticed, unobtrusive. She didn't claim a spot by the fire, didn't ask for a slot on the schedule. She simply was, nearby. And everything grew around her, literally. The grass beneath her feet was greener. Flowers that hadn't been there yesterday bloomed in the morning where she had slept. Nari found a kindred spirit in her. 2 druids, one scholarly, the other wild. They began to work together. Nari knew the herbs, Hannah knew the earth. And together they created a garden. On the 4th island, in the midst of the trial, amidst monsters and battles, a garden. Medicinal plants, roots for pain, leaves for inflammation, flowers that accelerated the healing of wounds. Cade looked at this garden and understood. His monopoly was over. Hands were no longer the only tool. Now there was a system. Him, Nari, Bree, Emma, Hannah. 5 people who knew how to heal, each in their own way, each with their own method, but together. And that was right. Because he wasn't eternal, hands aren't eternal, the body isn't eternal. He remembered this every morning when Ari massaged his forearms, every evening when Yuna would sit down silently beside him and he would place his hand on the back of her neck. These rituals had become anchors. His anchors, not theirs. In the morning with Ari, he felt that the day was beginning right. In the evening with Yuna, he felt that the day was ending right. And in between them, Zion. Every morning at 8, in silence, with her back to him, he worked, she breathed. His shoulder hadn't hurt in a long time. Nothing hurt. But she came, and he worked. Because it was more than treatment. It was presence. Hannah had changed something in his perception. Every morning she would say the names, 38 names, people from her burned village. Slowly, one after another, like a prayer. Cade heard it on the 3rd day. He was standing behind a tree. He wasn't eavesdropping, he just happened to be nearby. She spoke the names and paused for a second after each one, as if giving the name a place in the air. On the 4th day he came to her in the morning. He sat down beside her, silently. She began. The first name, a pause. The second, a pause. On the 3rd name he repeated after her, quietly. Hannah froze. She looked at him. He repeated the name, correctly. She said the 4th. He repeated it. They said 38 names together, slowly, without rushing. When they finished, Hannah sat motionless. A minute, 2. Then she said, "Her village has a voice again. 2 of them." She smiled. Cade had seen thousands of smiles in 2 lifetimes, smiles of patience after treatment, smiles of Olympians after victory, smiles of friends and colleagues. This one was different, like the first flower after a 10-year winter. He remembered it, forever. From that day on, every morning began twice. First, the names with Hannah, Then the herbal tea with Ari, then the hands, then the schedule, then work. Day after day, island after island. The fifth island, a desert. The sixth, swamps. On the sixth island, what Cade feared most happened. He fell. Not in battle, afterward. 3 days straight without sleep. Monsters attacked in waves. He ran among the wounded. He healed. He passed things on. He relieved spasms. He stopped the bleeding. 3 days, 72 hours. On the 73rd hour, his legs gave out. He fell face first into the swamp mud and didn't get up. His brain shut down. His body said, enough. He woke up 9 days later in a hut, clean, dry, covered with 3 cloaks. Nearby, all of them, taking turns, 24 hours a day. Someone sat nearby, always. He found out later. They had been holding him for 9 days, taking turns. Each one placed her hands on him and transferred her stats back to him. The system worked both ways. They had known this since the day Zion had transferred her power to him after the operation on Emma, but they had never used it on a large scale. Now they were using it. 38 women, 9 days, a continuous transfer. His body was regenerating at the expense of their power. When he opened his eyes, Yuna was sitting next to him, silent, her hand on the back of his head. 2 minutes, just like every evening, only now it was daytime, and she hadn't been sitting there for 2 minutes, but for 9 days. Cade looked at her. She was pale, thin, dark circles under her eyes. She was giving him too much, more than the others. He wanted to say she shouldn't. He didn't get the chance. She spoke first, quietly, in a whisper, that if they asked him to kill her, she would kill whoever asked. He closed his eyes, opened them. He answered, that she shouldn't, that she needed to lie down and get some proper sleep because she was exhausted. Yuna didn't smile. She didn't know how to smile, but something in her eyes fluttered, like a thread. That very one. Cade got up the next day, weak but alive. He stepped out of the tent and saw the garden. Hana and Nari had set it up while he slept. Medicinal herbs, decoctions, everything they needed. The camp had been running without him for 9 days. The schedule hung on the board, fully booked. Bree was leading the sessions. Emma was helping. Nari was making compresses. They'd managed, without him. Cade stood and watched it all, and for the first time ever, he felt no anxiety, no fear that everything would fall apart without him. Pride. They'd learned. He wasn't needed as the one and only. He was needed as a part, and that was better. Over the course of a year, they had traversed 4 islands without any losses. Hannah Lee joined the group on the 3rd island as the 38th. Cade taught her the names along with her every morning. On the 6th island, Cade lost consciousness from exhaustion. For 9 days, 38 women passed their stats back to him. Yuna sat beside him longer than anyone else. The camp functioned without Cade. He realized he was no longer the only irreplaceable one. The 3rd year, the 12th island, the last one. Cade stood atop a cliff and looked down. Below him lay a valley, round, perfectly round, like an arena. Walls of black stone, a floor of white sand. In the center, nothing. Emptiness. 38 women stood behind him. 3 years, 12 islands, dozens of monsters. The quiet ones who came again and again, mercenaries who never returned, diseases, wounds, storms, famine on the 8th island, a fever epidemic on the 10th, a crisis on the 11th when 6 women came to him at once and each said she loved him, each in her own way. Zion silently, with a single glance. Ari angrily, through clenched teeth, like a curse. Emma openly, with a smile, with tears. Yuna in a whisper, with a single word. Bree calmly, like a fact, like a diagnosis. Hannah quietly, through names. She added his name to the 38 from her village, the 39th. She said he was part of her family, alive, not dead, and that was her confession. Cade listened to each one, didn't interrupt, didn't look away. Then he answered, all 6, the same way. He said he wouldn't choose, that he couldn't. Not because he didn't feel anything, because Ian Rell felt the same way. He chose and killed everyone else with his choice. He said he loved each of them, not the same way, different ways, like different notes in a single melody, and that if this world forces him to choose just one, then this world is broken, and he's going to fix it, just like he fixes bodies, one joint at a time. They didn't forgive him that day. Some didn't speak to him for a week. Ari didn't come to the morning potion for 3 days.
Yuna didn't come to the evening ritual for 5 days. Zion came, every morning at 8, silently, as always. She hadn't missed a single session in 3 years. Then they forgave him, not because they agreed, because he was right, and each of them knew it. They had seen the fresco, they knew about Ian, and they knew that Cade was doing this not out of cowardice, but out of love, the kind that is greater than the choice of just one. Now, on the 12th island, all that was behind them. Ahead lay the arena, and in the arena, nothing. A system window flashed. The final trial. The keeper must enter alone, without weapons, without companions. 38 threads would be severed for the duration of the trial. Cade read. He reread. Alone, without them, without the threads, without the transmission, without hands on strangers' shoulders, just him. Zion read it too. Her face didn't change, but the sword in her hand trembled, for the first time in 3 years. She said no. Cade looked at her. She said no. He wouldn't go alone. She would go with him. Screw the system. Screw the rules. Screw the gods. 37 voices behind her said the same thing. 38 if you count Hana.
Cade looked at them. 3 years ago, 37 women strangers to one another on a white beach. Now, 38 people ready to defy the will of the gods for the sake of one man without a sword. He smiled. He said he would go alone, because he had to, because this was his trial, not theirs. They had passed through their 12 islands, killed their monsters, survived. His trial is different. He descended into the valley, alone, barefoot, unarmed. The sand was warm, just like on that first beach 3 years ago. The circle was complete. The threads snapped. All 38 of them at once, as if someone had yanked 38 roots from his chest. Pain. Physical. He fell to his knees, choked. Emptiness. Absolute. For 3 years he had felt them, every second. Warmth, life, presence. Now nothing. He stood up, slowly, looked around. The arena was empty. White sand, black walls, the sky was gray. No monster, no guard, nothing. A system window, new text. The Guardian's final trial. Touch yourself, Cade read, reread, to himself. For 3 years he had touched others, healed others, felt others. He knew every body in the camp better than his own, and his own. He looked at his hands, calluses from 3 years of work, scars, abrasions, fingers slightly crooked from chronic strain. He had never healed himself, never laid his hands on his own shoulders and looked for knots, never breathed for himself, always for others. He sat down on the sand, closed his eyes, placed his right hand on his left shoulder, just as he had done thousands of times with others. He felt it, a knot, deep, under his shoulder blade. Old, very old. Not from this life, from the past. Tension he'd been carrying since he was 20, since he started working, since he decided his body was a tool for other people's bodies, not for himself. He pressed, slowly, the spot under the shoulder blade, just like with Zion, 3 years ago, the same spot, the same place. He was treating it, not himself, always not himself. The knot wouldn't let go. He pressed harder, breathed. 4, 7, 8, inhale, hold, exhale. The knot was softening, slowly, like a rope that had been unwound for 30 years. Underneath the knot was another knot, and another beneath that. Layers, years, 2 lifetimes of tension. He worked. A minute, 5, 10. Hands on his own body, neck, chest, lower back, thighs, knees, feet. Every area, every joint. For the first time in his life, he was his own patient, and for the first time, he understood why he had avoided it. Because when you touch yourself, you can't hide behind professionalism. You can't be a doctor. You're just a person, with pain, with fear, with a loneliness that doesn't go away even when there are 38 people around. With guilt for dying at 30 and leaving his patients without a doctor. With guilt that his heart had stopped during a marathon and that someone might have seen it and someone might have cried, too. The tears flowed. He didn't stop them. His hands worked. His body let go. Layer by layer, year by year, pain by pain. He cried and healed himself at the same time. And that was the hardest thing he'd done in 3 years on the islands. Harder than stitching up Emma. Harder than enduring a bag over his head in the hold. Harder than telling 6 women he wouldn't choose any of them. Because telling yourself that you deserve healing, that is the hardest thing. The system flashed, brightly, white light. The final test passed. The keeper had healed the keeper. The threads returned, all 38 of them, at once, a wave of warmth, as if 38 hands had laid upon his shoulders all at once. He felt each one. Zion, steady, strong, like steel. Ari, hot, sharp, like an arrow. Emma, warm, soft, like laughter. Yuna, quiet, deep, like a lake. Bree, powerful, electric, like a storm. Hana, lively, green, like roots. And the 39th, the one he had felt since the 70th day. Invisible, warm, floral. She stood nearby, right next to him, and for the first time he saw her. A woman, young, older than the world, eyes golden, like a portal, hair white, like moonlight. She stood barefoot on the white sand and looked at him, a renegade goddess, the one who inserted him into the system, the one who had been watching for 3 years, the one who killed him in his past life so that he might live in this one. Cade looked at her. She looked at him. Silence. Then he said that her neck was stiff and that if she sat down he could help. The goddess blinked. For the first time in 1,000 years, someone had surprised her. Then she laughed, softly, like a bell from another world, and she sat down. The sky opened above the arena, a portal, huge, not to the next island. Home, to the mainland. 12 rays of light into 12 kingdoms, the blessing of the century, all 12. For the first time in Alion's history, because they all survived, all 38, and one. 38 women ran down the slope, toward him, Zion first, sword in its sheath, face wet, not from the rain. There was no rain. Ari was second, small, fast, eyes red. Emma was third, limping, laughing, crying at the same time. Yuna was fourth, silent but running towards someone for the first time, not away from anyone. Bree was fifth, with lightning in her eyes, with trembling lips. Hana, sixth, barefoot, with flowers blooming beneath her feet right on the sand. The remaining 32 behind them, all of them, they surrounded him. 38 people, and one goddess sitting on the sand, allowing human hands to touch her neck for the first time in 1,000 years. Cade stood in the center, wet with tears, his own, others, hands on someone's shoulders, someone's hands on his. The threads hummed, all 39 of them. Warmth. He looked up. The portal glowed. The way home. 3 years, 12 islands, 39 people, 0 deaths. He smiled. He looked at Zion. She was standing closest to him, sword in its sheath, shoulder at the right height, eyes dry. Almost. He said, 800, tomorrow, as usual. Zion Che. The woman who killed a bear with a dagger at 16, who hadn't cried for 16 years before he covered her with his cloak, who had sat by his hut for 3 years with a sword on her lap. She looked at him and nodded. Tomorrow, at 8, as usual. They stepped into the portal together, all 39 and 1. Light embraced them, warm, golden, like hands that heal. Cade walked last, as always, counting the backs. 39, all of them. He didn't look back at the empty beach. No need. The footprints would remain. 39 pairs, and 1 barefoot. The goddess who, for the first time in 1,000 years, was not walking alone. Light closed the arena. The portal snapped shut. The Ascension trial was complete. The end of the story. On the 12th island, the final trial required Cade to enter the arena alone. The threads snapped. The trial turned out to be not a battle, but a healing of himself. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, Cade became his own patient. He passed the trial. The renegade goddess became visible. Cade offered to help her with her neck. All 39 women and 1 man returned home alive. All 12 kingdoms received the blessing of the century. 0 deaths in 3 years. For the first time in Aelion's history,